So let's talk about undo history. Here we have our alien bust, and you'll notice at the top of the screen we have this dashed sort of line. If I mouse over these dashes, you see it says undo history, and it gives a number of the undo history state. It gives a date and a time for when that particular state was recorded. Anytime we're working in ZBrush, this undo history is being stored. I can click this orange dash and I can actually drag back through the history timeline. Now, this is my first time dragging it back, so it might take a couple minutes for it to update. But here you go. As you see, as I drag this back, changes that I made on the mesh are undone on the surface of the Z tool. If I come all the way back here to my first history state, we can go back to the very, very beginning. And let's drag it the last view, and there we go. We go all the way back to the polysphere, which I started that bust from. And if we click and drag, we can actually step through all those undo states, seeing every bit of the process. Now, the undo history is more than just a way of moving back in time in your model and undoing certain actions. As you'll see when you see the video on the undo history brush, the history recall brush, pardon me, you can sample states from undo history and then sculpt those states back into your Z tool or into another Z tool. So you can grab an undo state from one Z tool and transfer it to another. So there's more to the undo history than just undo and redo. You'll also see in the next chapter how we can create time-lapse videos of our workflow using the undo history as a source, so we can see our entire sculpting process played back in a very nice, easy-to-view video that could be shared online. I'm sure many of you have seen those online before. So the undo history is always being recorded. If I were to go to the Lightbox and go to the Polysphere Z tool, you see there's our first undo. It's undo state 1 out of 1. So I'll just make sure that my X symmetry is turned on. And I'll just take the move brush and just make some changes. And you see each time I create a stroke, it creates a new undo history state. If I add a subdivision level, that adds another state. Let's change to the clay tubes brush. If I start sculpting on here with the clay tubes brush, you see each time I sculpt, it adds a new undo history state. Now, this usually happens in the background pretty unobtrusively. It's not going to really draw attention to itself. Now, if I were to undo with, let's say, Control Z, you'll notice the orange line moves backwards, but we still have these dashed lines here. So I've moved back in the undo states now. If I were to make a change back here, you see it clears the undo history before that, or the undo history after that. So if I come back to here, you see that it clears everything before. Oops, there we go. Just using the clay tubes brush with the Alt key to plane this all back. And then if I click and drag this, I can move back in my undo states, or I can move forward in my undo states. Now, if you do run into a situation where your undo history is becoming unwieldy and it's more than ZBrush can handle, it will automatically detect that and it will tell you that it needs to delete some undo history states. You may find that you want to delete undo history states on your own. That's definitely the case when we are working with the history recall brush. Sometimes hundreds of undo states, hundreds and hundreds of undo states are just too much to deal with. So we can step back to a reasonable point, go to the Edit menu, and here you see we have the undo counter. So you can see that I am on undo counter 41 now. So if I go to 41, I can delete my entire undo history with this button, or I can delete everything before this point. So if I click that, I have now cropped the undo history to just this state and everything after it. So that's a pretty handy tool, because you will see the more you work with undo history, the more sort of unwieldy it can get. Now, undo history is lost when you save your Z tool. It will not save with a Z tool. However, it does save with a Z project. So if I go to File, save as, and I have the undo history button turned on, it will save the undo history with that project. Now that can make a much larger file, but it's nice to have that in some cases if you want to create a history time lapse, or if you just want to use the history recall brush, or if you like carrying around the undo history for any number of reasons. Now, Z projects save your undo history. Z tools do not. If we go to Preferences, we have an Undo History menu here. Now you can see we have Show Undo Selector. If I turn that off, the History slider goes away. That might be beneficial for some people if you find that you're accidentally clicking this as you move to the top of your screen, because sometimes it can be a little easy to accidentally click that like that, and you find yourself back in your undo states, and if you make a change, everything before it goes away. Now, ZBrush does have the option to give you, by default, ZBrush will give you a pop-up telling you that you're not at the last undo state. So don't worry, that won't be completely invisible. If you do that, it will give you a warning. Under the Preferences menu also, we have Show Timestamp. Now you can turn that off, and if we turn that off, it will not show the timestamp on each undo state. We have the max undo size per subtool in terms of gigabytes. We have warn when deleting history entries. This gives you a number of history entries that it will give you that warning on. So currently it's set to 25, but we're under 25. So if we do several more strokes here and get above 25, let's step up our subdivision levels, and let's just do a bit more sculpting here. We'll use the standard brush. Let's change back to a regular dot stroke. And we'll just create some more undo states here just by sculpting some random shapes. You see that undo history slider going, going, going. So now this is undo state 83 out of 83. If I step back a few and then try and make a change, it will crop. But if I come all the way back to, let's say, here, that's 13 out of 71, and try and make a change, it's going to give me a warning. The current active undo history is not the latest one. Storing this action at the undo history will remove 59 undo history entries. So click OK if you want to continue, and click Cancel to abort. So we'll click Cancel, and that's a good warning to show you, oh, wait, I want to make sure that I don't delete those undo states. Now, the slider here, warn when deleting, so that sets the number of undos that a warning appears if an action is done that will delete the set number or higher. So we can actually turn this down to 10, or we can turn it up even higher. We can turn it up quite high. So that's going to be a matter of preference. Enable saving will enable saving the undo history to the file, and optimizes the undo history size. So there's really no reason to turn these off. Now, you can turn on skip loading if you find that you have a lot of undo history saved in a file and you don't want to load it. You can turn on skip loading, and it will not load it by default. You'll have to turn on load undo history manually. And we have a reserved undo memory. So this is your reserved memory for undos. Now, if I go to File and turn off undo history, it will not save the undo history with my Z project. That needs to be turned on for that undo history to save. So going back to our alien, this was a ZBrush sphere sculpt. Everything on this was sculpted from a sphere. If we go back to the very, very, very beginning, we'll see once again that we have our very first undo state. We will have to load those undo states into memory here before we can start scrubbing through them. There we go. So anytime you're working, if you undo, if you Control Z, you will be stepping backwards in the undo history states. And if you Control Shift Z, you'll be stepping forward. Remember that if you step back within a number that's set in your preferences and then try and make a change, when you're back in the undo history, ZBrush will give you a warning, and you will end up deleting the subsequent undo history levels. Now, the undo history is really neat because you can do time-lapse videos from it, and we're going to take a look at that in the next video. This is mainly just about exploring what undos are, what the history slider is, and how to access some of the major settings for it, like under preferences, as well as under the edit undos here.